There has been so much verbiage, so much verbal diarrhea, really, about what happened in Connecticut. It was, I mean, surely this is just an absolute statement. It was grotesque. It was a moral gargoyle, for goodness sake. These children who were murdered. I mean, what more can we say? But of course, news talk radio, or talk radio in general, in the essence, it's defined by people giving their point of view. It's a great conduit for the street. I don't mean that in a critical sense. Ordinary people giving their point of view. The biggest station in this country is News Talk 1010, and Brian Doyle, whilst not the biggest person on it in terms of stature, though he's average size, I'm digging a hole here, is one of their finest presenters and hosts.
You're very
Great
kind,
ratings.
sir.
No, I mean that. Just remind people what time the show is on.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock every night. You co-host with...
John Downs.
Who has been on the show occasionally.
He has, yeah.
I like him, but I like you much more.
Well, he's a communist. That's probably why.
What have people been saying about Connecticut? Is it all about gun control? Are they criticizing America? What are their conclusions?
I think it breaks down into three different categories. Gun control being the first one and sort of the primary one, because as Canadians, I think we like to sit up here and say, well, we're better than the United States when it comes to gun control. But certainly we've had our incidents in the past. You know, the shooting at Dawson College, Cold Polytechnique, Tabor, Alberta. Those things have happened on our radar. The second would be mental health, how we treat people who have mental illness, whether or not we should be, you know, maybe putting them back behind, I don't want to say asylum walls, but walls where they can be housed and be kept safe.
For their own protection.
For their own protection and for the protection of society. And the third is an interesting one to me, and I didn't really see this coming, but America's overall obsession with violence. I think that was one that people have pointed out time and time again, whether it's television, whether it's video games, whether it's kids sitting on the couch, you know, playing those video games and getting points for actually killing people.
Canadians not do that? Canadian kids don't play the same games?
That's my exact point. You know, we like to sit here in the catbird seat and say to people, well, we're better. We're not like the Americans. I think this is a good time to take a look in our own mirror and see exactly how much alike we are. You know.
Yes, and it's the entire Western world, really, even Eastern Europe now, but certainly, as you know, Southern and Western Europe. The mental health issue is an interesting one, though, because there's a certain paradox here. The very people who have called for gun control, the left, are the very people who said we must get rid of the institutions, what were called asylums, bring these people into the community. I'm very sensitive to the whole mental health issue because most people with mental health challenges are not violent. They would never be violent. Sure. It's other people are generally more violent. But this man, it seems, was mentally ill. Other murderers, of course, have been mentally ill. Well, at what point do we say, I'm sorry, your rights are gone. You have lost your rights. We're putting you into an institution for your own protection. There was, it was a gay activist, wasn't he, out east, who was murdered. There was someone on I think, 12-hour or 24-hour parole. He was just out on the street and he knifed this poor man to death for absolutely no reason. So,
well, you even look at the individual on the Greyhound bus that, you know, sadly and tragically beheaded somebody. I mean, these things are real issues. And if you look in the United States, for example, I think it was something like 1 in 100 about 30 years ago were behind the walls of an institution of some sort because of a mental illness. That statistic is long gone, as we know. People are out on the streets when they 30 years ago would never have been let out on the streets. And the criteria has become so much so and so stringent that it's tough for the Crown attorneys and the prosecutors down there to get these people and keep these people behind bars. The onus has really become on the state, and the criteria is just too tough for these people to follow it.
I'm sure you've met them too. I have met people, loving parents, who've begged for their children to go into a mental hospital, and the state will say, no, you can't do that. Also, for goodness sake, I mean, a close friend of mine, a man who deals with paranoid schizophrenia, he's a wonderful, gentle man. But I sat with him one night when he wanted to be admitted into a mental health ward because he knew he couldn't cope anymore. We sat there for 14 hours. And in the end, the only way we could get him in, frankly, was by lying, because they simply wouldn't admit him. He was on the point of suicide. It was tragic to watch.
And this comes down, and I know I harp on this point every now and then, but political correctness is what really is keeping us. You know, we don't want to say that there are people out there that have issues that we can't deal with as a society. We don't want to admit the failure that we have, so instead we try to make them, you know, as people among us. And a lot of the time, they're not people that should be among us. They're for their own protection and the protection of the people they live with.
The person I mentioned earlier, who's a close friend of myself and our family, at one point when he was particularly ill, I saw him moving his head. He was moving his head away from the sounds that he could hear. The ear actually registered the sound. There was no sound. Objectively, there was no sound. Subjectively to him, he was hearing them. Imagine if he did have a violent tendency, what he could do. Gun control. Look, I'm not a gun person. I've never owned a gun. They frighten me pretty much. But so do the people who want to control everything in society. And when I meet the hunters, the huntsmen, the farmers who have guns, they're the gentlest, most responsible people. I don't want to give them a hard time.
Well, no, and I think there is a fine line here. And I have hunted before. I have shot a gun before. I fired off many different types of guns. And I think we have to look at... well, it's tempting some days. But if you look at it overall, I think the president here has an opportunity to do what LBJ did or tried to do back after the assassination of Robert Kennedy, which was try to get something passed in a very short window, because we know how the political system works down in the United States.
Is that appropriate, though, at a time when emotions are so raw?
It has to be. It has to be right now. If he waits any longer, if he waits a few months, the emotion and the sentiment will be gone. The NRA will have all of their spokespeople and lobbyists in the doors of those congressmen's offices, and you won't get anything done. Well, he has to hit it now when the emotion is hot.
You know, again, people, the NRA are so powerful, so influential. They've worked hard for that. Look, if you want a powerful lobby, the gay lobby, my golly, arguably the most powerful percentage-wise lobby in all of North America. We don't hear criticism of that group, but when it comes to people who own guns, they're so awful, so pernicious. They have a certain belief in society and how it should function.
The point is, though, the NRA has gone a little too far, and they've protected every gun. And I think that's where they're hitting themselves.
Every gun?
Well, the idea of protecting themselves from having the ability to have semi-automatic weapons, automatic weapons. You don't need these weapons out there. You don't need them to hunt. The only people that would, you could make an argument for would be military, perhaps police service. I mean, as somebody who is hunted, you just don't need these kind of high-powered weapons to do so.
No, you don't. But how about for self-defense?
Self-defense, you can have a handgun. And I have no problem with that, and I believe in the Second Amendment, but I believe the Second Amendment does have some limitation on it.
Do you believe up here we should have the right to...
Yes, absolutely. So, I believe you should have the right to... I believe in the Castle Doctrine. I believe you should have the right to protect your own home.
So you do believe that a Canadian should have the right to have a loaded handgun in the bedside drawer?
I do. I do. Absolutely, I do.
That's never going to happen.
Well, of course not, because, again, it goes back to this liberal political correctness that we see all the time.
Even within the conservatives. Oh, look at the Americans. America's actually a very peaceful place.
Sure
Most of America is absolutely peaceful.
Sure,
Kind,
sure it is.
Giving.
And the amount of guns that are being bought is actually on the decline.
Yes, as is gun violence.
Of course it is, but people, like to trump it up like this is an everyday occurrence. It's not. But we do have to take a look at those type of weapons. Semi-automatic weapons, they need to go, and that's what Barack Obama has to do in the next couple of weeks, not in the next few months.
See if he will. This is the last show of the year, I think, because we take a small break. So I will see you next year. Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas, sir.